People who operate with nonlinear thinking can see the forest between the trees. It's kind of like if you're around a parent and you hear one of their kids crying. Parents, especially very intuitive parents, know what type of cry it is. If it's a tired cry, if it's a whining cry, if it's like, oh crap, they're actually hurt. We need to go figure out what the hell is happening because of that. These are differences. The same thing happens when it comes to high finance. You're going to see things. You're going to understand things. You're going to start watching through the trees. And you also have to be patient enough to realize that, like, I don't have to understand everything today. But if I just get 1% better per day in a year, I've done a full circle. I'm good.
Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast, the ultimate destination for accredited investors and entrepreneurs seeking alternative wealth building strategies. Discover how to fast-track your journey to wealth and time freedom by thinking outside the box. If you're ready to join the ranks of the Contrarian Capitalists and learn the most effective ways to reach your financial goals faster, you're in the right place. Let's get started with today's episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast.
Thank you once again for listening to another episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast. I'm your host and your favorite silverback, Sylvania Harrod, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic of what I found from the most strategic investors that I happen to have conversations with, which is the art of linear versus non-linear thinking. So what does it mean by linear thinking? So most of the world and 99% of people I interact with operate inside of a world that is black and white. It is 1 + 1 = 2. But I'm here to tell you that the law of compound interest does not exist in the world of black and white. Eventually, the compounding just happens to operate in the gray, and it just keeps going and going and going to be able to be there. And so you got to ask yourself, why is it that 1% of the world's population owns over 90% of the wealth? It's because they do not subscribe to that way of thinking. They subscribe to a way of being non-linear. Because the reality is people ask me all the time, they're like, how do you find clients? How do you be able to do this? Who do I need to talk to? What groups do I need to be a part of? How to go through that structure? And I tell them, I honestly don't know. I really don't know. I just show up and magically things happen. So I've taught you guys about the scientific method before, which is in order to validate a belief inside of your own life, you have to be able to go through the process and test if that belief works in other elements. So let me give you an example. So if you use the belief that life is fair, well, you got to ask yourself, can I use this in multiple other different examples in life and other people use it and still get the same similar result? So if we look at it and we say life is fair, then we're going to be at a place where we go, okay, well, what happens to people who are born in different countries? Okay, what happens to those who never learn about the internet to be able to be there? Is it fair what happens to them? There are people that were good human beings who happen to die in car crashes or have heart attacks at 40 years of age as they're a great person. Is that fair? Technically, fair is it meant like that it's equal across the board. So if you live with that paradigm, I'm here to tell you that that belief is going to cause you suffering constantly. And you won't even know. You'll just think it's your reality. It's because we're just nothing more than just a vessel of different beliefs. It's like wearing another person's shirt, Like if you got that shirt when you were 6-year-old, it's going to fit a certain way. But if you're still carrying that same belief and that shirt doesn't grow and doesn't expand over time, you're going to be walking around with a belly shirt. So that is a belief that you can be able to look at and be able to identify, and we're just a collection of different beliefs. Then you just got to ask yourself the question, like, does this actually make sense? No. Most of the time, people are just executing from a space of what's directly in front of them, that they never stop and pause to actually evaluate the beliefs that they have. Because it's as simple as just shifting those beliefs in order to create a new reality. So hopefully by the end of this podcast, you'll be at a place where I can show you a little bit of a different belief. So to me, I see the world as gray. And I see it as gray because everything is up in the air. There's no good or bad. There are just items that happen to be there. So what does linear thinking look like? Linear thinking in the realm of, I've told you guys before about asset management and wealth management. If not, go back to that episode. You'll really appreciate it. Linear thinking believes that if I do a good enough job, I will go ahead, I can save some money. I'm going to dump money into a 401k. And then that 401k, I'm going to put X amount of dollars away over a period of time. And by the time I'm 60 years old, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be able to, or 70 years old now, I'm going to be able to retire off of those savings that I had during a period of time. And so for most, yes, that may be a reality. But here's the thing that you don't get taught about that. You're going to spend all of your best years of your life saving for the day in your typically health declines as you get older. And here in the United States, you're going to pay the highest amount of taxes through that period of time. So while it's non-taxable when you put it in initially, typically in your lowest tax years, unless you're the type of person that realizes that when I turn 70, I'm never working again, I'm never going to make money anymore, and I expect tax brackets to stay the same as they did 40 years prior to it, you're going to be in a place where you're going to realize, damn, I put all this money into different 401ks and this entire process while other people were making buku dollars off that amount to be able to be there. Don't believe me? Look up the founder of Vanguard. So there's a couple of very large 401k based allocators out there. You have BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, etc. So even they talk about that the 401k's mission of what it originally started with is actually not the reality today, based upon how their fee structure works. And that fee structure creates a thing where it identifies with the golden rule. Golden rule of capital, which is he with the gold makes all the damn rules. So if you're going ahead and you're looking at the fee structure, over half of what your potential earnings is going to be cut based upon these organizations that need to make their cut, because they're the ones going out there making the decisions to help build your pension plan and go through that process. That's because they operate in the world of nonlinear. The reality is that you, as the individual investor, is the person who's helping them because they understand the law of OPM, which is other people's money. So they're using your money to acquire the assets that they need so that therefore they can go ahead and have the rights to capital while you're going to get the smallest piece of change through that process. That's okay. Like that's a normal thing. That's for all non-contrarians out there. Perfect. Go do that. Go through that process. We need those systems and those structures there for majority of people. But if you're listening to this podcast, you're a contrarian. As a contrarian, you got to view what's outside the lines. While we can have linear structures to be able to be there, we need to execute in a place of nonlinear, which is 1 + 1 may equal 4, because we understand the law of compound interest. So what does this mean, and how can you use it, and how can you be able to deploy it when it comes to nonlinear thinking? You have to be curious, because if you look at things, I was having a conversation with a gentleman. He's like, hey, this company started organically. They went grassroots and they go through this process. I was like, okay, tell me the company name. Let me see who the players are. And guess what I found? Organic wasn't actually the case. They grew through acquisition. Yeah. So like in the beginning, one of the founders happens to be in real estate and private equity in New York City, which I'm here to tell you, New York City is the capital of funds and syndications. They crafted the whole market, being able to be there. So the world that I operate of high finance, that guy already knew how to do it. So the reality was he went ahead and he took loans in order to be able to acquire that property. What he did not take is debt against the asset. So he probably personally guaranteed some of his personal assets to be able to secure the money that was required to get it off the ground and get it started and funded. But you won't know that unless you live in a nonlinear world. Because linearly, if you look at the actual asset itself, the asset itself did not take on debt. But how do they pay their payroll? Most organizations have different lines of credit that happens to be for just like daily running, and they're paying a percentage down off of that. That's how they execute. So you can keep your capital there. You think Apple doesn't take on different amounts of credit in order to make things possible? Of course they do. It's called working capital. They use other people's money to help them with working capital to be able to get there. Technically, it's not a debt. These are the things that I want you to realize of the world in business that has been misleading you over periods of time, has making you believe that, oh, this is a linear world and it's the linear process you need to do, which is if you're a business owner, you need to make sure you have no debt loaded on your books, make sure you have none of that process that happen to be there, and you have a very clean business. I want you to believe that because I want to buy you. And then I'm going to load it up with a bunch of debt to be able to do it because I really know how to scale and grow. So you keep things clean and you follow that process because I want you to be part of that narrative. But here, my fellow contrarians, I want you to know that is the thing we want you to believe. I'm behind the curtain, right? I operate in the gray. So those select few who decide to tune into this podcast are going to learn. See the world as nonlinear. Everything in the world is gray. And that's a beautiful thing because you can move there, you're more like a special operations group. So in my time in the Army, you had conventional forces and you had special operations group. Even in special operations, they had different tiers of operators that happen to be there. But you won't know who they are, or they blended in plain sight, which is the point of being the gray man. So I'm here to tell you that start seeing the world as nonlinear. Start questioning things. Start realizing, like, where do they get their money from? How are they doing these things? Tony Robbins revealed it in one of his latest books, The Holy Grail of Investing. He was asking all these people who help create and craft all the narratives of what's going on and asked them this one particular question. Where do you guys put your money? And he realized overwhelmingly, most of them did not put it into the regular market. That's for retail investors. We put over half of our money parked inside of private equity and private credit. Like a lion's share of their money is being there. These guys that are multi-billionaires. So they don't eat their own dog food. There's stuff they're telling you about they don't do themselves. It's because they understand how to operate in the gray. Most of the world is based upon the narrative that they need you to understand and consumer. Because look at it, it's reality. The U.S. consumes more than any other country in the world. What happens if that consumption stops? The entire global economy would be impacted because they're all backing their money off of the U.S. dollar. So if they're backing off the U.S. dollar, then cool, that U.S. dollar drops. All the money and valuation they have drops. So how do we make sure that we're not caught up when the music stops holding our hand by ourselves? Well, you got to create narratives that talk about consumerization, which is what the whole world of media actually is. It's meant to show you there's no ad money spent. There's no advertisements. You're not going to buy anything. Well, I need you to buy stuff. You don't buy anything. How am I going to be able to grow my money and grow my assets and buy companies and do those things if people aren't buying anything? I hope this starts to make sense as far as like you got to operate in the world of nonlinear. So if you want to operate in the world of nonlinear, how do you actually do that? You start putting your money, your time, and effort into things that operate in the gray. You don't need all of the details because the gray is so ambiguous in its own particular way. But you start investing in different funds and syndications because you need to park some of your money to be there. You start your own fund in syndication. You go through that process, you be able to grow it, and you start realizing the value of those things of like following rule number 1 of high finance. Money is always in motion. Keep it constantly in motion. If you're sitting there and subscribing to the retail story and narrative of like, I need to have X amount in savings, which is doing nothing but helping the bank make way more money than they're in the high yield savings account, 4.5%, 5% they're giving you. They're giving you 4.5%, 5%. They're making 10 times the amount of money that happens to be there just because they can leverage out the money you have sitting in that account. So I will gladly pay you to park it in there because now I have consistent resources that I can use to go ahead and deploy. The foreign exchange currency market is a $7.5 trillion industry per day. So hopefully you're starting to realize that what you see is not what it actually is. What you see is what I want you to see. And by listening to this podcast, you can take a second and take a step back and be like, let me be curious like a child, because that's what's going to keep you where you're at. People who operate with nonlinear thinking can see the forest between the trees. It's kind of like if you're around a parent and you hear one of their kids crying, parents, especially very intuitive parents, know what type of cry it is. If it's a tired cry, if it's a whining cry, if it's like, oh crap, they're actually hurt, we need to go figure out what the hell is happening because of that. These are differences. The same thing happens when it comes to high finance. You're going to see things. You're going to understand things. You're going to start watching through the trees. And you also have to be patient enough to realize that, like, I don't have to understand everything today, but if I just get 1% better per day in a year, I've done a full circle. I'm good. It's great. Let's make it happen. So, as always, you guys can find me on any of the social media platforms out there, except for the TikToks. I don't really ever go on there yet, but that may change by the time this recording comes live. You can find me at Sylvania Harrod, first name, last name. Feel free to DM me. Feel free to message me. Feel free to call me out and say that everything I'm saying is wrong, and then we can have a civil conversation like normal human beings. Because I am a grade A troll, so I don't mind trolling at all. Troll away, friends. Here to help you as always. Stay grateful, everyone. Cheers.